Let me ask you a more practical question about the structure of the book. Why is it important to set the book over a year of Kata's life? And why was it important to start from that transition from Maryland to New Mexico?
So a couple of things. I think oftentimes books that have been written about the adoption experience have really focused on something that's called reunion. So they focused on that moment when the adopted person searches for, finds, doesn't find, whatever happens, their biological family. I really wanted to write a concentrated story that takes place over the year about a girl who is not at that point in her life yet because she is part of a closed adoption. So she's actually not legally allowed to search until she turns 18. And so encapsulating Kata's story basically between, it's not even quite a year, it's almost, it's like 3 seasons, sort of helped concentrate that moment, a sort of this coming of age moment where not only this drastic transition as far as landscape is happening, but also I think so much can happen when you're a young person in the span of a year or a season or over a summer. I also really like summer or a transition that happens over a summer because I think summers provide really rich landscape for storytelling as well. So that felt like a good way to tell this story is, you know, what happens in these 3 seasons to Makeda, and also that obviously she's still going to be experiencing throughout, but also concentrates it in this period of time. And then, I'm sorry, the other part of the question.
It was about just the transition from Maryland to New Mexico.
Yeah, so the thing that I did steal from my life as far as the setting is Maryland, Baltimore, and New Mexico are 2 of the many places that I've lived in my life. And I think I wanted a story that started on the road, because I think that there's something powerful about sort of road trip stories and starting in that place of I'm not here and I'm not there, which is also sometimes how Makeda feels about her identity. She's not here and she's not there sometimes. She's sort of in the middle of everything. So starting in like the middle of the country, starting on the road felt like a good place to sort of talk about Makeda's identity and her story as well.
That's some 3-dimensional chess right there. Continue.
And then New Mexico for me, I just remember moving there and just a drastic, how drastic the landscape was and how beautiful it was. And so I wanted to set a story that sort of had that drastic change as far as landscape, because I think that in some ways that's also, I don't know if I would say it's also a character in the novel, but it also really helps to sort of highlight sort of Kata's sort of feelings of both invisibility and hypervisibility in these spaces that she's going through. And so it just seemed like the 2 good places to set it that were really drastic. And it's fun in school visits. I have a map where I show, here's how many states Kata and her family drove through. I have a picture of sort of like the green, lush dogwoods of Maryland, and then like the Sandia Mountains and the sort of pink, red desert landscape. And it's fun to watch young people sort of take that journey with Kata, either, on the page, but then also when I'm talking through it and sort of think about a place that's different from where they are as well. So I think they were just 2 landscapes that popped out to me as well, as far as telling her story.
Was that the order that you lived in them, from Baltimore to New Mexico?
It is, yeah.
So what are the biggest changes, biggest cultural differences that you encountered then?
From that move? Oh my gosh, it was so long ago. I also remember the landscape. I mean, it's not that I had never been sort of west southwest before. I grew up partially also in Colorado, so I spent time in Denver and in Boulder, and so it wasn't completely foreign to me, but I just remember the dryness. And I think that was it. I was like the dryness of New Mexico, the cold, like I wasn't expecting how cold could get in the desert versus, and I think for me culturally, one of the biggest things was just, I personally felt a lot of isolation in New Mexico. I think I went from more of a community of folks in Baltimore. And New Mexico for me felt a little bit more isolated personally when I was growing up there. I don't know if the big cultural differences. I just remember landscape and sort of this beautiful landscape and also this isolation that I was feeling at that time as well.
From a person who hasn't lived there, I'm hearing, okay, The Wire versus Breaking Bad, and I'm sure it's not that.
Definitely not, because I was definitely like a teen or a tween there. Yeah, but I think it's interesting thing about how much landscape can like set a mood or change a mood. And I feel like I need to go back to New Mexico as an adult because there's so much beauty there that at the time when I was living there as a teen that I sort of, it was like a tumultuous teenage time. And so I don't know if I fully appreciated the beauty of that landscape. It just felt like really imposing at the time.
Well, I've got more questions for you about the book, but just real quick, a question about living in 7 different states and in so many places. What does that do to your perspective? Do you find that people are very similar everywhere? Or is just Kentucky's the best people you found and that's where you want to be? Or is that just where you are for now?
I think that, first of all, for me, I think what it has done for me is complicate the idea of home or that question, where are you from? I've been getting that question in general as a Black person, as an adoptee for my whole life. People sort of, seeing with my family and wanting to know, no, but where are you from, like originally, like wanting me to say a different country or, it complicates that, but it also just complicates this idea of like, well, where are you from in the country? I have a hard time with that question. And so for me, home is actually cultivated in people, right? I feel a sense of home in certain communities with the people that I love. And it's not necessarily about a specific place. I feel like there are lots of different places that have felt like home to me based on the community I had there, based on, the formative years that I've lived there. And so it complicates that idea. I definitely think there are good people everywhere. And I don't know if Kentucky is my, forever home and landing place. It's feeling really good right now. But it's, it's still a place where people hear me speak and they say, you're not from here, right? Which I'm not. Or people try to place an accent and have a hard time with it.
Aren't people charming with these questions?
Yeah. I think it's a complicated question. My answer is just that I found home in a lot of places. And I think even one of my bios floating around is like, calls many places home because I do. Michigan is sort of a default home. I wasn't born there, but I spent formative years there. We landed there when I was in high school, and I spent high school and college and a little bit after college going back there. And my family is still in Michigan. And so, Michigan is where I learned how to drive. I feel like that's really formative, like learning to drive in, my parents' big Suburban in the snow.
And the real snow, not like we call it here in Indiana or Kentucky.
No,
we're talking higher than the vehicle you're driving in snow, right?
In Kentucky, when people are like, "Oh, it's going to snow today," and I'm like, that's nothing. I'm not digging out my car. It's fine. And then I'm like, oh, maybe I do feel like a Michigander when I'm saying things like that. So yeah, I think And I think that this is true of just my identity in general. It's like I feel like I belong in a lot of different places. I found home in a lot of different places. And sometimes that's really lovely. And I just sit in that and I'm at peace with that. And then sometimes it can be really tiring, right? To have conversations with people or people wanting to pinpoint or place or put me in a specific sort of box. And that's just not my experience. My experience is sort of, I've lived on the West Coast, I've lived on the East Coast, I've lived in the Southwest. I'm now living in the South, and I've lived in the Midwest. Like I've experienced all these different regions, and sure, some places have felt more I felt more connected to, but it's just given me a perspective of the ways people make their lives in multiple places of this country.